What you see here is the 5 tragic days of 2008, where Georgia gets a ruthless attack from Russia. But unfortunately, this harsh reality didn't start here. It has a long and painful history. A small part of the Georgian history which I and my generation has lived through has been marked by rapid development of the Georgian state, its integration into the democratic world, partnerships with Europe and US, and Russian attempts to prevent this progress. Some of the ways which Russia wants to prevent this progress is by direct military aggression. This Russian aggression left a bloody barbed footprint on the Georgian soul and Georgian soil. Georgia is not the only exception. Other democratic nations are facing similar challenges as well. Recent geopolitical discussions are dominated by the analysis of Russian aggressive revisionism and its attempts to undermine global order by posing hybrid challenges to the free world. Today, the democratic world almost reached a consensus that Russia is the #1 threat. But this took almost 10 years after the Russian invasion in Georgia in 2008. Russians first appear in the history of Georgia as hired soldiers in King Liparit Balash's army for the civil war in the 11th century. The actions take place near Tbilisi, in a location known as Ktegari, where the Ktegari fortress is located. In total, there were 3,000 hired Russian soldiers on Balash's side. Till today, there still stands the reminiscence of the Ktegari fortress on that location. During the time of Ivan the Terrible, years 1533 to 1547, the Russians are interested in the south. When the Mongol era is over in the Russian history, Moscow is becoming a strong political center and is starting to expand southwards. At first, this expansion was demographic, but then it became political. The Cossacks are expanding south to Ukraine, Zaporozhye, and Black Sea, and they arrive in the midst of the Northern Caucasus. After Ivan the Terrible captures Astrakhan, he comes to the Caspian Lake and builds ports, which eventually become a Cossack village in the Northern Caucasus. But this expansion did not last long, because after the reign of Ivan the Terrible, Russia starts to weaken and needs to go back up. During this time, Georgia also starts to break up. The occupation of Constantinople is very important in geopolitics because if we look at the map of Eurasia and look at where the Islamic Empire is and where Georgia is in total siege. Nowadays, these identity markers are very different. But in medieval times, since there were no elite levels, religious manifestations were very important for identity and identification. Actually, in this time period, Georgia is going towards a dead end. The country gets weaker and is divided between Persians and Ottomans. In year 1555, the Persians and Ottomans sign an agreement to split Georgia between them. In effort of stopping this agreement from happening, Georgia sends and activates ambassadors in the West. Reciprocally, the West send missionaries, thus creating Catholic communities in southern Georgia. These Catholic missionaries fulfill different functions such as being religious leaders, medics, and merchants. Right now we're 1,700 meters above sea level in eastern Georgia. We're standing on top of Gombori Pass. Right behind me you see the Greater Caucasus. Beyond this there is Russia. This region has a strong geopolitical importance for 3 major countries: Russia, Persia, and Georgia. For Russia it's a strong foothold for expansion down southwards. As for Persia, it's an opportunity to expand its former empire. But most importantly, for Georgia,
Since it was the most wealthiest part and had the biggest population, it plays an important role for the Georgian statehood and its further development. King Erekle managed to unite the Kartli region with the Kakheti region. His bigger plan was to unite Georgia as a whole, but he couldn't do this due to it going up against the Russian politics and the Russian plan. This fascinating fortress is of Erekle II, located in Telawi Kakheti, where he made many important decisions which shaped the country's future. Still, till today, there's a controversy on whether these decisions were correct or not, but we can only speculate. What would happen if these decisions were made? Well, some of these decisions truly and fundamentally shaped the history of Georgia. To better understand the decisions that were made, we must zoom out and take a look at the national, regional, European, and wider global processes. In the Kartli region, Russia appears at the end of the 16th century when they made the first political act, the Protection Book. This treaty was signed in 1587. This treaty has a long-lasting consequences which still come till today. Soon after the signing of the Protection Book Treaty with Russia in 1587, Prince Erekle II and his father Teimuraz II emerged. They had a goal to create a regional kingdom which would play an important role of being a regional political entity. For this, they had to take part in a social activity, regional political act, and many other agreements. Now we arrive at year 1783, one of the most controversial discussion topics today, signing of the Georgievsk Treaty with Russia, treaty which was meant to help Georgia and protect them from invaders. The controversial part about this treaty is that whether Georgia should have sticked with Russia or they should have broke the treaty and gone with Persia, when Persia was on the rise in year 1795. Finally, we come to the year 1801. This year marks the annexation of the Kartli region by Russia, and also the end of Erekle's reign. To get a better understanding of the time and era, we can take a look at some of the global processes that are happening outside of the world. For example, let's take the American Revolutionary War. It happened approximately 1 month after the signing of the Georgievsk Treaty. Or let's take the year 1801, when Kartli got annexed and Erekle ended his reign. Somewhere around that time period, the Battle of Copenhagen happened, and Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States. With these processes, we can see that the world isn't what it was. It's changing. There are different political, social, and economical processes happening all around the world.
Besides these global events, one incident happens in Europe, 28th of June 1914, where Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophia. This triggered the bloodiest war in mankind, World War I, killing over 20 million people. After this, the world started searching for a way of establishing some kind of order. This gave birth to the concept of sovereign nations and the League of Nations. As a result of World War I, Georgia gained its independence in 1918.
In 1918, 22nd of May, the National Georgian Council announced the independence of Georgia. And became the Democratic Republic of Georgia, and was one of the first social democratic republics in Europe. The Georgian independence was immediately recognized by Germany and the Ottoman empires. Other countries also recognized it, such as Argentina, Belgium, France, Italy, Japan. Georgia placed itself under the protection of Germany to prevent from growing threats from the Bolsheviks. But after the peaceful 3 years of democracy, in 1921, February 11th, the Russian 11th Army invaded Georgia. There were major fights to defend the country, but on the 17th, they approached Kojori and Abakhmela, where I stand now, 12 kilometers from the capital, Tbilisi. 500 young cadets from ages 20 to 25 from the Tbilisi Military Academy came up here to stop the Red Army from advancing, but their efforts were unsuccessful. On the night of the 25th, the Red Army approached Tbilisi, and Georgia forcibly lost their independence. 14 bloody days of fighting for freedom, independence, and dignity. From this date, 25th of February 1921, the Soviet occupation has started. This lasted for 70 years, until the Soviet Union had collapsed. Under the Soviet Union, the fight for independence was still continued, but it had a more subtle form. There were different anti-Soviet uprisings, for example, the Kakheti-Khevsureti uprising in 1921. After this followed the Svaneti uprising, also in 1921. And then the August uprising in 1924, which was led by Kakuta Cholokashvili, a former Georgian military officer, and his group of rebels known as the Oath of Felti. But this uprising was suppressed, which marked a definitive Soviet rule over Georgia. But this did not stop uprisings from happening, because on June 24, 1936, another uprising happened, now in the Khevsureti region. Along with the uprising, the representatives of all Khevsureti sent a letter to the American government. The letter read as so: "The people of Khevsureti are very bothered by Bolsheviks. They forbid us to exercise our religion and want to form kolkhozes and impose high taxes. They insist on this, but we do not agree. We won't surrender until the last Khevsur is alive. Although we do not have weapons, we shall defend ourselves with swords and daggers. This is our strongest appeal to your country. You have the power to assist us in the time of hardship. We hope you will give us your helping hand. You are the only ones who could do something for us. Brothers, please help us. We're suffering hard times." This is the letter that all of Khevsureti sent to the government of America. This museum contains tragic stories of thousands of Georgians oppressed by the Soviet regime. For example, Stalin's order to execute thousands of people monthly. Many of these stories are described in the 1954 U.S. Congress Special Report, Communist Takeover and Occupation of Georgia, Select Committee in Communist Aggression.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
With the help of European nations, EU, NATO, and US, Georgia started a turbulent state-building process. Every battle has heroes who risk their lives for their country, but their identities are unknown. Only a few know. Sobbing does not suit a real man. Don't act like this. Act like I'm at a festival, and not at war. If you ask me, the most important thing for a man is standing here and defending the people who don't break. I count this as an obligation for every Georgian man. You are a historian, man, and you are sorry for the men that fight with guns in their hands for their motherland and become heroes. The people that fled this war are incarnated as cowards. I don't want to be a coward. And I know you don't want having a coward son. So stop slouching and walk with pride that I didn't choose to be a coward. So what else that? A letter deserves soft words, but I'll tell you this. I stand rightful against you and my country. 22-year-old Zura Gurchiani wrote this letter to his father. Unfortunately, Zura never came back from this war. He died on July 5th, 1993 in Abkhazia with his friends in effort of protecting Kamani. In Kamani, separatist soldiers went into a church where unarmed civilians were hiding and massacred them. They also killed Father Andrei Qurashvili. We can see that for the Russian Empire, religion has no meaning. And when the talk is about gaining and controlling land for the expansion of their empire, they even kill peaceful civilians and clerics as well. Progress became visible in the 2003-2008 period. Notwithstanding external pressures and domestic challenges, the process seemed irreversible.
Revoluția შვიდობიანი მთელი ხალხის მონაწილეობით ყოველგვარი გასროლის გარეშე ამ წუთებში მიმდინარეობს თბილისის ქუჩებში. დესპოტის შევარდნაძე მოსწონდება დღეს გადადგება.
ეს არის საქართველოსა.
ეს იყო ვარდების რევოლუცია საქართველოში.
მოქალაქეებთან სრული მორალური საფუძველი მაქვს. სრული მორალური საფუძველი მაქვს. მე როგორც არ უნდა შემიშალო ხელი, ჩემს სათქმელს მაინც ვეთქვი დღევანდელ პარლამენტს.
But again, as many times in history, Russia was irritated by Georgia's sovereign choice and decided to interfere with force. On August 7th, 2008, Russia started a war against Georgia.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia has a decision to make, like numerous times in Georgian history. This decision was between Russia and becoming a part of Europe. Georgia chose to become a part of Europe, but Russia couldn't tolerate Georgia's decision, so it interfered with force. While the whole world was celebrating the Olympic Games in China, Russia started to invade Georgia. Right here where I sit now, in the center of Georgia, city of Gori. On the August 7th, 2008, Russian planes flew in from the north and started bombing the city. They bombed civilian houses, hospitals. They bombed the military base of Gori. To the Russian aggression, Georgia answered with firepower. Several Russian planes were shot down. But in parallel to this, Georgia also tried to communicate to United States, Europe, and the UN to solve this problem with democratic ways. To stop the Russian aggression, international engagement was needed. US Navy entered the Black Sea and the EU started to facilitate the ceasefire agreement between Russia and Georgia. On the 12th of August 2008, the ceasefire agreement was signed. Even though the battle took only 5 days, it was one of the most important 5 days, because this battle, a little war, shook the whole world, like it is described in this book, A Little War That Shook the World. The reason why this war shook the world is that it was not only against Georgia, it was against democracy and freedom. After the signing of the ceasefire agreement, as Russia usually always does, he violates it. Even though there is no troops in Gori and there is no hostile military actions, Russia still occupies part of Georgian territory. More importantly, Russia's aggression towards freedom and democracy still continues. It can be seen here and elsewhere, such as Ukraine. This is the city center of Gori. Right here is the administrative office. Behind it, that's the Gori military hospital. Russian planes were flying over this place right here and bombing him. Houses were destroyed. Civilians were being evacuated. And right there, a ballistic missile landed.
Today, Georgia still persuades its independent path of building a democratic world. European Union, NATO, US, the entire Democratic Committee supports Georgian journey back to becoming a fully pledged member of the family of democracy.
Modernized our command structure, bolstered our cyber defenses, and we have stepped up our support to our close partners, Georgia and Ukraine. Sovereign nations with a sovereign right to choose their own path.
Absolute majority of the Georgian population, which is 80%, supports Western integration, but consensus is strong.
Serve your nation. We're standing in the gap on this great frontier, united in the defense of freedom. You are the best of us, heroes all, and you are here, the Americans among you so far away from home, because the United States and Georgia are bound together by the abiding oath of friendship and by our shared commitment to the cause of freedom.
Yet still, the task is not easy, because the path is marked by the bloody barbed footprints.